Welcome to the first session of Profit Sessions, a new video series from ProfitMetrics about the strategies behind understanding and improving your profitability. I'm Sam, head of marketing at ProfitMetrics, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. Today's topic is e-commerce insights, lessons from 2024, and strategies for 2025. And as you can see, I am joined by Frederik Boysen and Andrew Lolk. Gentlemen, please take a moment to introduce yourselves. Frederik?
Yeah, my name is Frederik. I'm the CEO and founder of ProfitMetrics. And for those who don't know ProfitMetrics, we are a profit optimization tool that helps e-commerce businesses and agencies optimize towards profit, both in marketing channels and report and get insights into the profitability of the e-commerce businesses.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Lolk. I'm the founder of Savvy Revenue. Basically what we do, we run Google Ads for e-commerce stores. We are 10 people, so we're kind of an elite team. Everybody works with 2 to 5 advertisers. So we like to see ourselves and why we can have this conversation today as it's more of a mini in-house CMO that just goes beyond just looking at Google Ads. But our bread and butter is Google Ads. So that's where most of my experience and things come from. But everything e-commerce, everything Google Ads.
All right.
And Andrew and I know each other. We actually didn't know each other before ProfitMetrics, or maybe short before, but we found out we grew up like 5 minutes from each other.
Really?
But now Andrew is sitting over there in Mexico, and I'm here in Copenhagen. But yeah, we found out the first time we met. So.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, I'm glad we can bring this international crew together. Mexico, Copenhagen, and I'm out in Prague. So thank you to the power of internet video calls. All right. Today, we're going to talk about 2 main topics. Number 1, we're going to do a quick review of 2024, discussing what worked and what didn't. And after that, we're going to get into 2025 planning, how to set yourself up for a more profitable year. So to get started right off with our 2024 review, one thing that I remember a lot of people saying in 2023 and 2024 was that Performance Max, Google's PMax, was the future, and essentially that it would replace standard shopping. Now, is this something that has happened?
So that's I might be on record for being the biggest spokesperson for standard shopping ever since PMax came out. So what we saw happen during 2024 was that Google behind the scenes started being more open to standard shopping and being less aggressive about saying, hey, standard shopping will go away. You heard it less and less and less. And then towards the end of 24, we really saw that they basically released the shackles or the handcuffs that were on standard shopping. So today it competes more or less equally in accounts with PMax, where PMax used to have this like ultra priority. So if you had one product in PMax, one product in standard shopping, PMax would forever take over or take priority. That's gone now. And we also see more and more that, and I've heard from Google behind the scenes that there are betas with, for instance, new customer acquisition for standard shopping and other parts of the Google ecosystem. So it appears that the route that some people thought that Google were going to take with replacing all standard shopping, even some people said search, with PMax, and you could only run a PMax campaign in the future. That doesn't seem to. It hasn't happened, and it doesn't seem like it will happen. So I think people just need to have their eyes open a little bit about the opportunities and not just go one route. But yeah, I can continue talking about that for a long time, but I'll leave that a minute I'll leave a break for like.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Okay, so it sounds like, in summary, no, it did not happen. We still have our standard shopping campaigns. Frederik, anything you want to add on?
No. They're still developing on new features on shopping, so standard shopping. So it seems like it's definitely not going away. Otherwise, I don't think they would use resources on keep on adding new things and functionalities over there that wasn't actually there before.
It was always ridiculous to me to hear that people were claiming that standard shopping wasn't worked on anymore, that smart bidding as a whole wasn't worked on anymore. It's only thing that the thousands of engineers in Google did was work on the PMax algorithm. That was always ludicrous to me, and I understand why some people would say it. It mainly came from Google reps trying to push advertisers over to PMax by like fear mongering and other things, but that's not what happened. And when you talk behind the scenes, and especially when you talk like with some of the product engineers on PMax, and you try to say, hey, what if we do, for instance, this good old-fashioned feed-only PMax campaign, and they would just look at you, well, why would you even do that? Just run standard shopping. Then you can just run standard shopping instead. Like you don't get any value out of running PMax with feed only. So, and Savvy is one of the things we've stopped doing towards the latter part of the last year when we heard like 3 people say it in a row, because we were also thinking like maybe there's something in the algorithm in PMax because so many people talked about it, but we haven't seen it. And the more and more we've switched over to standard shopping, again, we always had 50, 60, 70% of our book of business on standard shopping. So we only had like a third on PMax anyways. So it hasn't been a big switch for us, but I know a lot of agencies and a lot of in-house teams that use this as, hey, if performance was bad in 24, then, hey, maybe we should switch from PMax to standard shopping. And those were the same people pitching going from standard shopping to PMax back in 23. So I think one of the big lessons and the things that I've seen from last year is people are just chasing something new to do sometimes. Instead of looking at, okay, what is my business? What are things I can actually change? What are things I can do in my campaigns? So they try something new because it sounds awesome. It sounds fresh. It sounds like, hey, this is smart.
Quick and efficient.
And when it actually doesn't do anything in the end.
Okay, so it sounds like standard. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket kind of thing, even if that basket is very shiny and powered by AI. Okay, speaking of strategies, I want to get into which strategies you guys, as people who've been working in e-commerce more than just about anyone else I have spoken to, what strategies do you feel drove the best returns in 2024? Is there anything particular?
I can start off there. What we were seeing with our clients and what our agency partners were doing. We saw a lot move over to looking at these backend numbers. So they were looking at what did the Shopify backend numbers actually tell you, and not only looking at what's within that e-commerce or that marketing platform and what is the ROAS in Google or Meta, but actually looking at the business. And one of the things we have pushed a lot, and I can see that a lot of companies have adopted and actually have huge success with, is looking at contribution margin as your North Star. So essentially your profit after all the variable cost and the ad spend, and that number, if that is trending in a positive direction, the business is doing better than it did before. And essentially that's the number that needs to pay for the fixed costs like salaries, warehouse, and so on. But if the number is high, that's also where you can see you can go in and reinvest. And if we look at 2024, the CPC, the click prices went up a lot. And that's probably also why a lot of people out there were searching for, okay, it's not working here in PMax, let's go to standard shopping again, or trying that new thing. Will that work? But essentially it was also about unit economics, that they couldn't hit those target ROAS or those POAS targets they had before because costs were going up in the ad channels, and maybe the unit economics didn't add up anymore. So looking at the contribution margin and actually focusing on that number, seeing how can we impact that, is that trending in a positive place, that allowed a lot of our clients to actually scale their ad spend much more aggressively, because now they could actually see with the numbers coming from the Shopify Magento, calculated the profit and ProfitMetrics, seeing that they actually had a profit. So it allows them to be much more aggressive as long as they saw that contribution margin trending up, or controlling it on blended ROAS, MER, blended POAS. That really, really showed some great results, and companies really, really growing in probably a tough market, because it was a tough market for many last year.
Sure.
Yeah. I think like So I'll start with saying I agree. Because I do, and we see the same thing. I'll just try to pull out some of the cases where we saw problems with this last year. Because I agree, contribution margin is by far one of the better North Star metrics to have out there. We saw a couple of cases where it just went wrong. One of them is when people focus too much on contribution margin. They misforecast what their contribution margin should be. So if, for instance, September, they say, okay, we need to have 1 million in contribution margin, and they trend towards 800, then the only action that they take is to say, how do we get to the 1 million? And that only way to get to that for most, when they look at this, is to cut ad spend, try to find low performers, cut it away. And that sometimes work. We had one particular case where it worked pretty well, and we went back, we started hitting contribution margin. But then when we hit a big sale, we were like index 70 on the sale days, because when we didn't do a post analysis on it, we could see we had bought so much less traffic during the heavy focus on contribution margin. And again, it wasn't just Google Ads, it was also the Meta Ads team, it was also internally, it was also email, everybody was focused on contribution margin. So when you forecast it wrong, you sometimes forget some of the underlying metrics you also need to follow, which can be traffic, it can be overall revenue, it can be other things. So it's just important to always know that yes, North Star contribution margin, but you can get some pretty bad results if you ignore your traffic numbers, if you're going to ignore your AOV, if you ignore your new customer, like some of these other metrics, and you don't have to choose all of them. Like we have some very large businesses where it's traffic. Then we have D2C companies where it's a new customer acquisition cost that we also use. So some supplemental, some secondary metrics is really important to build into your contribution margin metrics.
And I totally agree, because it's also at looking at that contribution margin. Is it short term or long term? Because if you just want to increase your contribution margin in the short term, you go into remarketing, retargeting pools, you increase your ROAS or POAS a lot, and what actually happens is you force the algorithms in Google or Meta to work towards existing customers, because there you will have a lot higher return, obviously. But at some point, you don't have any more in those retargeting campaigns and so on. So you always have to have that right mix of going after new customers, because you need to fill that funnel up with new customers. And that's where we see that once you actually have these numbers in place and you start also focusing on that we can actually be more aggressive on new customers, we are allowed to have a lower ROAS or POAS on new customers than we have on existing ones. That's also where it becomes very healthy, because it's not a short-term contribution margin. You're investing in the future, but you're still controlling it on contribution margin, which should over time essentially increase that contribution margin from that ad spend. So it's also a lot about looking at what are you actually buying. Are you just paying for the existing customers by increasing your ROAS to increase the profitability right now? And that could be dangerous, because if you have a sponge and you just keep on draining it from customers, if you don't fill in new water or get new water in, at some point it will be very, very expensive to get new customers in. So you need to have a mix always on that.
100%. And I'm glad you mentioned the algorithm, because especially in Google, it's one of the things that nobody really understands anymore, how auctions work and the way that the smart bidding works. Yes and no, but it's where we back in the day, if we wanted more contribution margin back in the day, we would lower our bids and lower bids more for things that were performing poorly. So you would across the board, if you have 10 keywords, you would across them just pull them all down by 10%. That's not how smart bidding works. It doesn't look at that specific on things, or that broadly. I'd better say it looks at, okay, all of a sudden it'll close down an entire segment of audiences and devices for a specific keyword. So your CPCs will be the same, but your ROAS will go up. But it means that you're missing you're missing an expansion. You're missing some width, what I call it, on accounts. And like it was, again, back in the day, the best way to run a better Google Ads account was to buy more traffic in a cheaper manner as long as the keywords were still converting. Today, that game is almost completely gone with the way the smart bidding works. So if you, for instance, we had a case where we walked into Black Friday with a too high ROAS because the peak season had gone way too far into fall. So our drop between the two peaks we had in the year, in the summer and during Black Friday, it was much deeper, but it was shorter. So it meant that we had to pull up ROAS a lot, like at a much higher ROAS target than we actually wanted to. And on this particular case, we were too careful. So we didn't lower the ROAS enough and fast enough before Black Friday started. So when we started Black Friday, the first couple of days, we were 10-20% behind on revenue in an entire country. And it wasn't until no amount of seasonal bid adjustments could fix it. No amount of changing max CPCs could change it. So what we had to do was simply, we had to lower the ROAS target to below where we actually wanted it to be. Then it expanded out and brought some of those keywords, search terms, products back into the fold. And for the latter part of the week, we did hit those 10% above last year, which we were going for in this particular case. So it's just knowing like how some of these things, when you start restricting them because you're trying to hit a contribution margin, you can actually hurt yourself in the long run. So I love contribution margin. I think it's super important, but I also think it's very important to have some, like, just you need some brains around this. And this is why I believe marketing today is much more than just clicking some buttons.
Okay.
And if I just have something to add there,
please.
It is much more strategic now, because the thing that happens when you just increases your ROAS is that it's whenever somebody goes into the auction, Google look at them. What can we bid and what do we predict that the outcome will be? And if you just increase it, then you will most likely just go into those that are really in market, that really shows a high intent for this product. The problem is just you have X amount of search volume on those, and then you never broaden to maybe a little bit broader phrase where they also can convert, but you actually just you just decreases the volume. So it's just so important to look at not only contribution margin, but not only ROAS or POAS, because again, ROAS and POAS is just an efficiency metrics. It doesn't tell you anything about the volume. A POAS of 1.5 can be much better than a POAS of 2.5, because if the total volume coming out of it and profitability, if it's profitability or revenue is larger, then it can be much better. And because you can actually go into those auctions that are not in remarketing list or very, very high intent. So it's super important that you actually look at multiple metrics at the same time.
Okay, so it sounds like no real easy answers here. Contribution margin is a key thing to focus on, but taking more of a long-term view of it rather than trying to gain short-term wins at the expense of other metrics. You want to have your eye on that as the prize. You want to guide your strategies by it, but you don't want to sacrifice the things that you're doing now in order to achieve it in the short term.
Oh, exactly.
All right. Thank you, guys. I also did want to talk to you about some of the most significant challenges that were faced in 2024 by marketing. Is there anything, or by e-commerce, I should say, is there anything that stands out to you as a major challenge that e-commerce companies were running into?
I think everyone can agree that the consent mode and consent banners, I think it was in start 2024, where it's not a new thing. The regulations here in EU have been here for many, many years. But when Google came and said, we will essentially shut off your tracking, your conversion tracking, if you don't comply with this, the market changed so damn fast. And they added all of these consent banners. They needed to be compliant. And not that it was wrong, because it was the right thing to do in terms of compliance, but suddenly you knocked off like 30% of the data, and then you have Google consent mode if you have enough volume, because there is a lot of advertisers out there that actually don't have enough volume It could be very large ticket sizes they're selling, or it can just be smaller. I think it's around 700 ad clicks a day before it actually start models.
Sure.
But even though it models, it takes some time. So suddenly all of these metrics and comparison year over year they didn't have them. It was impossible to actually to do a comparison from last year.
Just like during COVID.
During COVID. So again, just 1 year where you couldn't really compare what you were doing last year, what was working and so on, because you didn't have the data, as well as it also confused the hell out of the algorithms. Google had a super hard time actually figuring out the targets. And if people didn't change the target ROAS accordingly, they weren't hitting the targets and volumes went down. So I think that has been a hard transition, and it took a long time actually to figure out, and there was a lot of errors in the industry. We were helping so many clients, even though we don't do consent banners, but they were not firing correctly, or didn't get the track data on the landing page with the click IDs and weren't set up correctly. So I think that was at least Q1, probably Q2 of 2024. That was the focus of many Google PPC specialists to get this solved on all clients and
we love it. We love doing that. It's what we're good at. It's what we like to spend our time on. It's like, I love it. It's like, it's one of those tasks that are just like, it's one of those things you have to do, but there's no value in doing it. It's like, it's just empty work that has to be done. It's like your finances. It's,
the most fun kinds of stuff.
But I think one thing that you didn't touch on is like which we've talked about a couple of times before. For like, that's the model. How comfortable are we with the model data? Because I don't have that conversation with anybody. It's just like especially right when consent mode came out, it was like oh gosh, we lost 10, 20, 40, 20, 30, 40, 50% of our data right now. What's going on? And then like a couple of days later, oh, it's back. Why? Well, modeling, data modeling. And it was like, it's in some cases it looks to be surprisingly precise, but
yes, in some cases it doesn't.
And we're like, wow, like it's just now we always knew tracking wasn't exact, and that's something that's come up a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. Attribution isn't correct, tracking isn't the end all be all, and now the numbers we didn't trust in the beginning anyways are now model data. And I can, from somebody who sits and actually works on Google Ads and for what I call like mid-sized companies, all tracking usually works. They do not have a CDP, meaning they don't run their own first-party data and stuff like that. Some have maybe have some data in some BigQuery in some different places, but as you can hear, it's not super sophisticated. None of us know what to do with model data. We don't have a way to fix it. We don't have a way to change it. We don't have a way to comment on it. We don't have anything. So we're just basically just sitting and hoping it works. I know as you get higher up the food chain, you have people working on it to try to see if it's right and those things. But I would venture to say that 90% of people, 99% of people who listen to this have never had the thought, is my model data correct? And if they think, is it correct, then what am I supposed to do about it? So it's just something to be, I don't want to say concerned, but just have it on your mind somewhere that it's a lot less. Yeah, just have it on your mind.
But it is a hard conversation because we are working with tracking every single day, and we take advantage of the consent mode because we need to do something with the loss of those who say no to consent. But it's super hard to actually say, is this totally correct? Because we have seen cases where it looks, and when we have tested, where it's like, really, really, really precise of what is actually missing, and it seems really, really, when we try to compare some numbers from the back end and so on. But we have also seen some where there's more than 100% of the back end numbers, which is pretty odd, and that is just super hard. And is it actually using the real value? Yes, it does. But then some don't have advanced mode because they say we cannot fire a Google Ads script, so they have the basic mode, which is just in the documentation just says it's not as precise, but what is it actually doing? One of the things we are actually doing to try and see how much it models is that we will make a pure server-side conversion action where we will send in with click IDs and enhance conversions with leads, because Google are not modeling there. So we know it's only the consented conversions that are sent in, but we know that there is no modeling. And I would say that maybe some will even change and optimize so that even though there is less conversions, then they will just adjust for it in the target ROAS, but then they know it's real numbers. But just having that as a secondary where you can actually say, okay, the modeling seemed pretty accurate over time, or it's at least modeling the same, because there could be a change in the consent modeling tomorrow and we wouldn't know, and then suddenly there's 3% more or 5% less, and we wouldn't be able to really see it because it is a black box, and it has to be a black box because it's model data. It cannot show any PI data. So we are simply creating a conversion action simply for debugging this and seeing it. And if you have those kind of accounts where it seems like it's modeling too much for some reason, where you cannot go in, we try and can debug some things and so on, but sometimes it's just impossible. Then you can actually shift over to say, okay, I only use the conversions that have consent, but at least I know there's no model data. It's the ones that we actually can verify there is a click ID or an attribution towards Google.
So taking the actual conversions that you have proof are real, are not modeled, using those to form your opinions on it. I mean, that seems like a safer option if we're not sure how well the modeling is working.
Or just have it like where you look at percentage, if it suddenly models a lot more, because I would assume a large e-commerce business, they would have more or less the same percentage of people not giving consent. It's probably pretty average, at least in a geo. Germany is super high, but if you looked at Denmark or Sweden or Netherlands or something like that, it's probably pretty equal month over month what that percentage is if there's enough volume. And then if the model data goes up and down, then you at least have something to compare with and take action if it happens. Because you could end up, if it models too much, to use way too much ad spend.
Okay, some good strategies behind it. Now, we're running a little long on some of this, but I do want to touch on one more thing under this challenges section before we move on. Something that I've had a lot of people talking to me about is the fact that ad spend has become much more expensive over 2024. How can people avoid this? What is happening? Why is this happening? What are people doing wrong?
So I think the main thing, like, you need to understand that ad spend has always gotten more and more expensive. And even if you look at the US versus Europe, the US search market is also way more expensive than Europe. So we can already see now like where we're heading in Europe in terms of CPCs, click prices and stuff. So it will always be more and more expensive. But what we generally see, the biggest challenge is being like when teams just continue, just let smart bidding do its thing, and the competitive market changes. In some industries, we saw it like drastically last year with Temu. And again, like, and they just go like, hey, we used to be number one on our main keyword, on our main products. We used to fill 3 out of 5 ad spots. We need to continue that. We need to compete. And Temu just have like way more budget than any of us combined. Like they were bidding for savvy revenue at one point in time. So they were
like that.
It's pretty crazy. So
that was what they wanted, savvy revenue. That's for sure.
So thinking that we can go in and compete with them on bidding as a whole is such a bad idea. And again, that was a really big thing, but those small things happen on a daily basis. You talk to somebody who runs, let's just say, jewelry or accessories or something like that, and once you become bigger and bigger and bigger, you go from just having rings, so now you also have bracelets, now you also have necklaces, now you have earrings, now you have etc. And all of a sudden, every single part of your SKU, every single SKU becomes a smaller part of your bigger business, so you can't focus as much on them. And that's where one of the smaller players can go and say, and now I set better images, so I get a better CTR than you. Now I do this, now I do that. And some of the things we've really seen make a difference to combat increased ad spend is, like, I'm not going to go through the contribution margin again, but that is an important aspect. But trying to set different ROAS or POAS targets for different campaigns, trying to understand what campaigns, what again, it can be search versus shopping, it can be products. Which ones pull in new customers versus existing customers? That's a thing, actually. Like, some products pull in more new customers. Search has a tendency to pull in more new customers, which makes sense as a broader, it's people clicking on something that's much, and text that is much broader than a specific product. So some of these things make sense, but like different campaign structures based on seasonality, sale periods, pricing insights, and all of these things, and not just having 1 to 2 big campaigns where you go, I'll let smart bidding do its thing. Because again, a lot of people before 3 years ago have no understanding, like, that started PPC last 3 years, don't know how the auction works. So all of a sudden, it just becomes really, really difficult for them to do some of these things. But helping smart bidding, helping the structure, there's things you can do, different campaign structures is a big thing.
Okay,
that is also what we have seen. We have seen, like, the labelizing, the scripts, the shopping boosters we have becoming more and more popular, and the standard template, some love it, some doesn't, the standard way of just dividing it up in ROAS side, but everyone have their opinion on it. But I believe a lot in doing some kind of granular setup where you actually remove some of it, because what just happens if you have too many products consolidated there, if you have a really bad ROAS or POAS on certain products, but you have a great one on others, and that could be because of Temu was really, really competing hard on some of those where you really cannot make a lot of money. The problem is Google just keeps on spending on those, and just by getting those out of that campaign that are actually not performing up to that target, might allow you to use more spend. Maybe there's more impression share to get in Google, and you can push more on where you actually have some kind of profitability or hitting target ROAS, while a player like Temu, or the big problem was here that everybody followed because they needed the revenue. So everyone were trying to follow. So it was not only Temu, it was just a reaction of everyone going up. That said, I think that we saw in a lot of accounts that it seemed like in Q4, Temu was not as aggressive anymore. What did you see, Andrew? Did you also see that Temu like pushed a little bit back or something? They're still there, but not as aggressive.
Temu started pulling back already during the latter parts of the summer and then it's very difficult to go out and pull as a whole. I just think what we've seen, at least, it's just like the market share, as you started looking at it, it started pulling back in certain specific industries. It was like it had put a blanket on the entire market, both in US and Europe and everywhere, and just said like, okay, what are we winning? And then they all of a sudden they said like, well, I'm not winning by bidding for savvy revenue. We're not selling high-end PPC services for e-commerce stores, so let's stop that. And then started like shifting more over to where they are actually winning, where we can see there's a certain pullback in what I call Temu dominant categories. We still see a pullback there, but they're still really great. They're still there. Like they still sell the things that people buy. So it's like they've gone a little bit more performance oriented and pulled back a bit. They're still there. Still, the good old-fashioned way to deal with Temu still works.
But they have probably actually just done what we talked about before, because they have looked very long-term, and they have been really, really aggressive taking market shares because they wanted people to get into that app where they can send the push notifications, they can send the emails and make their wheels or whatever spinning wheels they have there. But I think I saw some numbers. I think that they were the #1 visited store in Denmark. Also meaning that at some point, they have captured all of the users that love these crappy products and so on, and just thinks it's super fun to shop. They have probably gotten them, so they're probably starting to see very high diminishing returns, and now they're actually capturing the profitability. They're taking the keywords and are in those auctions where they make money and maybe can capture new customers, but most people that would love to shop there, they already have the app installed on their iPhone or Android. Sure. So that could also be why they're actually going a little bit back, because they don't have to.
Maybe also because they get a bunch of free advertising by being mentioned in the news every freaking night. Like it's like every they mentioned it like at least once a week. in Danish news, and LinkedIn is on it. Like it's also like yeah, they got to get a bunch of free news. So I think like.
Yeah, and the crazy thing was, I ordered like 15 things, and there was maybe one thing that I might be able to use in the future, and I thought still it was so fun. And then I talked about this experience where, oh my God, all of this crap. And then suddenly my friends and colleagues started, yeah, I tried ordering. It was the same. It was so much crap. But they have also talked to all their friends, and everyone wanted to try. Yeah, that was a weird phenomenon.
On a complete side note here, my wife watches YouTube on our living room TV, so I get to see what she watches. Like she found a channel once where they buy crap on, like not necessarily crap, but like they do like a roulette and they buy like 10 things from some Chinese marketplace website or Temu or different places. There's this auction and live shopping in Asia. So it's like, and then they do like a full video series. So the first one is where they go in and they try to buy these things. And then when the things actually come, then they open them and grade them and show them and try to dress us on and stuff like that. And like my point with that was, it's become such a big thing. The studio quality of this, guys, it was insane. This wasn't an iPhone setup. This was a pro studio with pro cameras, with different angles, different everything, like with 3D scanners. Like this was like, it's become a thing. And so people are not just, like you said, like they're not just buying it for themselves and trying it out. Now they're seeing other people buying all the products from Temu and different like live shopping, and not just Temu, but live shopping in China, and following that on YouTube. Like it's very funny.
But the craziest thing with this live shopping in China is you have 24 hours live shopping. But when that person who are doing that live shopping is very tired, then they have an AI avatar doing it. I've seen this where it looks like that person that are just standing there continuing doing that live shopping, but it's in the night. It's an AI avatar. It's crazy. It's so huge. There is some players that are like insane in China just doing this.
Oh man! All right. Well, that is a somewhat frightening, but also interesting way to end our challenges section about this. Guys, while we have some time here, I do want to get into our 2025 planning. So to start with, let's say I am an e-commerce company. What are some of the best KPIs that I could focus on for Q1, Q2, 2025?
I can start on that. I believe that, of course, I still believe the contribution margin is what pays the bills. Sure. But I think that it's super a lot of e-commerce businesses and agencies transition to looking at these blended ROAS, MER, blended POAS. Super good transition, and it's great that people actually knows that in-platform metrics is made for optimization in platform, but it's not the full truth. You need something where you're looking at back-end numbers. But the next step is to start dividing depending on the business, because if you're selling phone accessories, maybe there's not a natural retention when people are coming back and needing a new iPhone cable. That can be pretty hard. But in those businesses where there actually is retention, I think it's super important to start looking at how much are we paying for new customers? How big a percentage is returning customers? Because that allows you to be so much more aggressive and go into auctions you otherwise couldn't, because you know it's new customers, and if you actually know and verify on those data that they are coming back, and you can see they're coming back, then it allows you to be much more aggressive. You can still make money on the first acquisition, but you don't need to make as much if you actually know they're coming back in 2-3 months again, buying more and putting in more money in the business. And this is what we see people using our dashboard and adapting. I think this is the right direction.
So really focusing on. Sorry, please.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I was very surprised how many people started using blended numbers last year. It's been something that we have a book of business of around 30 clients, and we went from maybe a couple of them doing it to all of them doing it. We basically don't have any that don't do it anymore. And even on the leads that I talk to, where I usually have to pitch it, they're all like, no, we're doing blended and we're doing like this and this and this. The one thing that just stands out with all of them is they only do blended. That's it. there's like I said, there's no other thing. So I would just say, now that everybody's gotten comfortable with working with blended numbers, pick another metric, pick another thing. Don't try to do it all. Don't choose 10 secondary metrics. Just pick one. You can change it every quarter, every 6 months, every year. But just, if it's new customers, then track new customers. How many new customers are you getting in? What's your percentage of new customers? Which again will show you your percentage of returning customers. Traffic numbers is really good in some cases. Spend allocation between Meta and Google and any other channels you're spending on. Too often it's like, well, we're just spending 60-40 and we'll continue to do that. No, what about pushing it? What about changing it? What about during times of low demand, we can't spend as much on Google, more on Facebook? What if there's high demand, then Google is more efficient or becomes more efficient? So not to say that we have to switch it around, so Google take more than Facebook, but 50-50 at least. It's something we've played with a lot last year, which worked really well. But it can also just be like, try to track organic channels or non-paid channels, because like we all just didn't look at what we're spending, what is our revenue or contribution margin. We're like, okay, what's happening? Like, because like if you get a better, like if your email flows, if your email things gets better, if your SEO gets better, if your overall branding, direct traffic, however you want to call it, gets better, your contribution margin or blended numbers also get better. We've seen accounts, and even our own accounts, where internal operations just have done better on some organic channels, and our blended numbers look better, and our Google Ads ROAS is the same, and we're like, guys, it's not our fault. Like, we'll gladly take credit and we'll gladly spend into this, but let's agree we're spending into this blended number because your organic looks like your organic is doing better. So looking at some of these secondary metrics, so you're not just blindly spending into it at all times, but invest properly in those things, like just blended ROAS 2.0, just take it one step further, whether or not it's blended ROAS or contribution margin, etc. Just take it one step further, build another metric in there.
And so that it's also just, doing tests and trying to say, okay, what do we actually want to achieve? If we have a business where we get a lot of people coming back, a fashion brand or something like that, if we go for new customer acquisition, you start up PMAX with new customer goal, or you do some prospecting ads where you remove all of your existing customers in Meta, and then actually look, can we see a positive trend in new customers? Can we actually see it? Are we starting a new channel? We are maybe starting up an affiliate, or we are starting up TikTok, or we are actually starting to use a lot of ad spend in YouTube. Can we see some kind of increase in the contribution margin or over a period of a month or two? Or do we just see diminishing returns going down? It's not. Data scientists would probably say to me, that's not accurate enough. We need to do mixed marketing models and so on. But sometimes if you have a hypothesis and set up for, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm changing, and then trying to look at those KPIs in a blended way on the back end numbers and seeing if they're actually trending in the same direction as they should be, that's a pretty good way of doing some tests.
Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, it sounds. Sorry,
I'd say on that note, I would just say it a little bit like, I think it's important to go out this year and build in that secondary metric, but also like a lot of the accounts that we see in-house still have bad habits. It's messy, it's old, it's not been tested, you haven't tried the new things because everything has been working fine for you. And it's really not until people go out and say, well, now we're not hitting our 10% growth a year or 20 or 30 or 40. And then they come and say, hey, can you guys look at this? And they're like, of course, we'll look. But it's the same thing every single time. It's like, you're still running ads like it was 3 years ago. You're still running Google Shopping as if it was 3 years ago. You're still running search as if search responsive search ads haven't changed the way that you should structure ad groups. You're still doing all of these things, and just come on, just streamline it further. There's so many resources out there. You don't need to pay for an audit. If you do, of course, awesome. But there's so many resources out there, and just try some new things. Get some things streamlined. Change things in your account. It will do better. Trust me.
Okay. I was just going to say, I feel like a real running theme of this whole roundtable is you can't just set it and forget it. You can't just rely on PMAX alone. You can't just rely on the strategies that were working a few years ago. You can't just pick one metric and be like, this is the only thing I'm going to look at. You really have to consider the whole picture, and you have to be ready to change and iterate as the situation changes with you and build your strategies. One other thing I wanted to get into on this, we touched on it a little bit before. Privacy regulations are increasing. Cookies are disappearing. I think they really mean it this time. How can companies adapt to get this data that they need, ideally without doing too much modeling?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit into that, the tracking part, but essentially we cannot do much about the privacy regulations because most businesses need to be compliant. But what we need to do is we need to stop losing conversion data that are not due to privacy, but just because of technical things like wrong redirects from payment gateways or ad blockers and so on. Trying to fix all the leaking holes in the bucket, that's like first thing. But I also believe a lot in the way of having. I think consent mode is amazing because we will lose so much data and the algorithms need data. But as we cannot really know exactly what's in there, it's also important to have a view without it. So you can always verify if something suddenly happened, if suddenly it's modeling 10% more than it normally does, that could destroy your spend, because it will just, if you're not using up your whole budget, or Google is allowed to use 2 times amount of your budget every day, or I think it's even 3 maybe, then suddenly you will start spending a lot more. So I think you have to be very careful at looking at those numbers and trying to verify somehow. And the only way we have found out we could do it was to actually have a conversion action without any model data to verify that it seems correct.
Yeah.
It seems like an easy thing to build into ProfitMetrics and just help us, all of us Luddites that work with Google Ads these days that don't know anything about any of these things.
Coming in weeks.
No, because again, like I'm just saying it, like, so from a Google Ads perspective, like it's become impossible to work with as a Google Ads specialist. As an agency, again, you have some resources you can pull on, like you, but we've also just like, it's hard to build a data team or tracking team internally in Savvy and feel like it's worth the money. It's like you need 2 people at least that can ping pong. And because if you only have one, then that person leaves. And can you actually have enough work across 30 clients? It's not always work you have to do, charge for it and stuff like that. We have partnerships with agencies that do tracking because it's become we can't do it anymore. We can kind of troubleshoot, but it's not worth our time to do. So we have troubleshooting arrangements with other agencies. Just go in the second we think something is wrong, we just click a button in our system and sends over to them, and then they start doing their troubleshooting. Because it's like, as a Google Ads specialist, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I can see like this looks kind of right or this looks kind of wrong, but then what? Like, then it's just useless. So it's just become so difficult. And there's nothing new really on that. It's just getting more and more difficult.
Yeah, more and more black box. It definitely is.
The black box. I've been hearing about that. Yeah, that has been the analogy for all of these AI generated campaign fixers for as long as I've been doing this. But you know what? That actually brings us to the last topic that I do want to discuss. AI. We've talked a little bit about PMAX, about not relying on it wholly, but AI is becoming more and more of a thing for both consumers and e-commerce companies. What role do you think AI is going to play in e-commerce in this coming year?
And Andrew and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, actually, a little bit. And it's weird. Both Andrew and I have been in this game for so long. I think I've been doing e-commerce marketing for 18 years now. And it's I started with Google, and it's still like Google for most e-commerce where it's like retail focused. It's still Google that is the biggest channel and driver. And it's the first time ever I've been thinking about there is actually something that might be able to be a real competitor to Google. And yeah, Google could do the same overlay, but I've taken myself in, I don't know how to Google anymore. I'm writing in questions like very long, where before, I was a super Google. I could always find whatever I wanted. But now I'm starting to make these really, really long questions and so on. And it's just ChatGPT especially have just changed the way that I'm asking a question. And I think that will impact if SearchGPT or somebody else will really get a lot of the consumers. I think the way we are looking at especially search ads will be very different, because if you will give the reply right away, or search optimization, the organic results will be different. Maybe not shopping as much, because there you actually want to see a selection and have an overview. It will probably change, but I think that there is actually, I would be a little bit afraid if I was Google right now.
And per default, afraid if you were Andrew running a Google agency. So I think that I agree. It's the first time ever I've given it any thought to life beyond Google, because again, we need to understand, we are when developers and tech is like the front foot in terms of all of new developments, tech and stuff like that. So we're really, really on the forefront. With that being said, there's some things right now that we're seeing just in terms of behavior. I think it's the first time Google ever fell below 90% market share in search this last quarter or something like that. So there's some definite things that are pointing towards the fact that this is bad for Google. I also feel like most of AI as we see it today, and this is my official point of view, most AI we see today is still missing the mark on what it's supposed to be. It's still, I call it a one-to-one. I write ChatGPT and ChatGPT gives me something back. I still need to be very precise in, hi ChatGPT, now you need to act like a LinkedIn expert. How should you structure your content? Okay, you need to do this above the fold. You need to do this, and I go, okay, now take my content that I've written and write that according to your brief. So there's still a lot of things it doesn't do. It doesn't remember things. There's no memory, and some of these things, even though it says that memory update in ChatGPT app.
Yeah, it remembers a little more, but not a ton more.
It's still a one-to-one thing but if we look 5 years ahead, I think that something drastic needs to happen. Google needs to do something drastic because it needs to be smarter. That's where AI comes in. Like I don't mind an AI on my wrist, on my glasses, in my phone, on my computer, looking over everything if it means I don't have to remember things anymore. If it knows that I am inclined to buy DDC brand stuff that's a little bit more expensive, if it's somehow fancy and has a feature I like, awesome. But I will never buy a pair of Nikes for $150. But I'll buy a pair of DDC brand shoes that have this new feature or look this specific way for $150. I have personal preferences that it should learn, and this is around buying a pair of sneakers, but it should also be around how do I plan my groceries? How do I plan my restaurant business? How do I plan my travels? How do I plan my day-to-day? How do I plan everything? I think we're still a good chunk of time away from it being really ingrained, but the future that I see X number of years ahead where this is super ingrained in us, I see no reason why anybody in the world would Google something and go through a list of websites to open them up to 5 different cookie pop-ups, to seeing ads all over the web page, to see recipes that are full of content on how you do it, when I'm actually just looking into how much egg is it I need to put in my pasta recipe again. Yeah. Like that's there. It's just like Will from Sierra Interactive said in a conference once I heard, ChatGPT is a much better experience than search is today. And I agree. And I think we're still pretty far away from it affecting product searches and Google Ads as a whole.
Sure.
But I can see 5 years from now where it's gonna, if Google doesn't find a way to disrupt themselves, then they're gone. And that's a big thing. You could never say that 5 years ago.
No, and I can already see now, without really thinking about it, that I was sitting between Christmas and New Year's and setting up some BigQuery project for ourselves, where the database, and I needed some data from certain systems into BigQuery. And instead of going on Google, I needed a system that can do X, Y, Z, and I needed to pull it in this way, in this frequency, and so on. I went in there. Can you find a tool that can do that? I got 3 tools, and the first one it mentioned was the exact what I needed, and I went out buying that product. So that already took a 3, 4, 5 clicks on a Google ad away from them. And I got the perfect product in one prompt.
And yeah, Andrew, to your point about going to find a recipe, I can use ChatGPT to get a recipe without learning about someone's grandfather's home story about how they made oat cakes back in the woods, which is a benefit for me as well. So I think
we made ravioli a few months ago, like 6 months ago, and this was the first time I really started using ChatGPT more, because I was like, we have this ravioli recipe. What kind of salad would go with this? And it literally came back with the perfect lemon dressing salad recipe that complemented the main dish perfectly. And I was just like, wow.
No, it's
I can't. That's something like, I didn't know that. So I didn't know to search for it.
I went to the store and didn't have a plan and just bought a bunch of ingredients and then was like, oh my God, what am I going to even make with this? And I just typed them into ChatGPT on the way back and said, what's a recipe for this? And it created something for me. So there are functions and functionalities that I really like what you said, Andrew, about how we're not quite there yet at the point where it's ingrained the way that Google is in the way we live. But I could see that happening in the next 5+ years.
But it's actually already taking some of those more advanced purchases. These were purchases. If I was just going to buy a shirt or something like that, I would still go to Google. But this were one thing where I knew I would have to click on a lot of ads. I would have to go through, because it's SaaS software, so there's so many ads. I had to go to third, fourth page in Google to find the real thing and research. It gave me such a fast, just like your studio equipment that you actually made the whole list there.
But isn't that also because we're not used to getting product recommendations in ChatGPT yet? Like it's not a part of it yet. So it's a little bit like, for instance, like if I'm gonna look for a T-shirt and I go, what are the best men's T-shirts? It will basically summarize everything that's read. It will not customize it to me and my buying behavior yet. Sure. But once it does that, then you will look at. Okay, so just think about this. So there's the experience of writing into ChatGPT that knows you, that knows your size, that knows how the size works across different websites, knows your preferences, knows your closet, knows what you've bought before because it's gone through your entire purchase history through your email. Great. So it knows that. Versus, so when you ask it, hi, I need more black T-shirts that don't fade and hold their don't fade really fast. Okay, you bought Western Union shirts 4 months ago. It seems like they've faded already. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked this. So I would recommend these 3 instead. This one has a good offer right now. Versus the experience of Googling it, men's black T-shirts that doesn't fade, and you just get 5 random Google ads based on whatever converts the best in general. That's the 2 different experiences. ChatGPT isn't quite there yet, but I can see
Google needs to change some things. Yeah, they need to change some things that is drastically and could maybe go into their business model, where normally those 5 clicks I would have done on that software, that's the business model, that somebody are willing to pay very high prices for that 5th click because I actually buy something, and that's the way where we click on a lot of things, where suddenly it will only be 1 click.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's that business model thing. Maybe they for once go away from click to like being able to pay per purchase, or a percentage of revenue, because it was much more value from that.
See where it goes.
Again,
conversion rate goes up crazy. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to sit down and discuss profitability and e-commerce in 2024 and 2025 and beyond. And thank you to all of the audience that's joined us for this. This has been the first session of Profit Sessions, and we will be back with new topics in the future. Any final words you guys would like to say before we say goodbye?
All good here.
No, if anybody's interested in hearing more hot takes or things, and I usually call people out on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to hear me demolish people's best practice advice, I usually do it on LinkedIn, Andrew Lolk. Just connect, follow. I'm there. So connect with me there. You'll get more good stuff in Google Ads.
All right, I know what I'm doing after this. Thank you guys, and I'll see everybody later.
Thank you.